we transition from one committee to the other. We will begin this morning with bill introductions. Do we have bill introductions? I do have one. It is 26 RS 2706, and bear with me, the short title is lengthy. This concerns public assistance, requiring the Secretary for Children and Families and the Secretary of Health and Environment to enter into data matching agreements with state agencies to verify eligibility for food and medical assistance, directing the Department of Health and Environment to submit certain data to the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, prohibiting certain public assistance program waivers or exemption without legislative approval, prohibiting self-attestation for purposes of determining eligibility for public assistance programs, requiring redeterminations of eligibility for medical assistance on a quarterly basis, limiting retroactive enrollment in the medical assistance program, requiring immediate termination of eligibility for medical assistance upon verification of death of the enrollee, increasing the age limit for able-bodied adults without dependents, prohibiting certain exemptions from work requirements under the food assistance program, and amending various statutes and repealing the existing section. In other words, this is the bill that mirrors the federal H.R. 1 big beautiful bill provisions. Are there objections? Seeing none. Any other bill introductions? Yeah. 2706. You bet. Any other bill introductions? Seeing none, we will move on to our presentation today on the overview of the Kansas Universal Service Fund. We have Steve Garrett, Deputy Chief of Telecommunications from the KCC. Welcome, Steve.
Good morning. I'm Steve Garrett. I'm the Deputy Chief of Telecommunications. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I was asked to come here to provide an overview of the Kansas Universal Service Fund, otherwise known as the KUSF. I'll begin with a brief overview of universal service and then discuss the KUSF in more detail. Universal service is essentially the principle that a basic service to be provided to every resident in Kansas. In this case, it's telecommunications. Both the Kansas and Federal Telecommunications Act of 1996 contain provisions to develop universal service funds to maintain and enhance universal service. There are three primary sources of revenue for local telecom carriers. Local telecom carriers receive revenues from three primary sources: local rates, which are the ratepayers; inter-carrier compensation charges, which are rates paid by other phone companies to use their network to transfer calls. The last reform of that was done in 2022. And the third source is the USFs. That would be the state and or federal. Historically, the desire has been to keep local rates low so that phone service is affordable, so the local rates have been subsidized by the ICC revenues and USF. Kansas incumbent local carriers may collect from the FUSF, which is the Federal Universal Service Fund, and the KUSF, which is the Kansas Universal Service Fund. Some states do not have a state USF fund. Slide 3. The Kansas Universal Service Fund, or the KUSF, was created by the KCC as required by statute and implemented March 1st, 1997, to make quality services available to all Kansans at affordable rates. All telephone companies, regardless of technology, wireless, VoIP, or wireline, are required to contribute to the KUSF, and the assessment can be, and usually is, passed on to consumers' bills. The current assessment rate is 12.15% of interstate revenues and will increase to 12.67% on March 1st of this year. A quick glance at the 30-year average is 7.21%, and the 10-year average is 10.12%. The KUSF is not assessed on the same revenues as those assessed for the FUSF. The FUSF assesses interstate and international revenues, while the KUSF is only assessed on those revenues considered to be intrastate revenues. Slide 4 shows the KUSF assessment rate over a time of 10 years. The entire history would be difficult to show in one slide since we're approaching the fiscal year 30 of the KUSF. When the fund was created, the assessment rate was 9% of interstate revenues. It dropped over time to a low of 3.7% in 2002. It has stayed around 11.5% to 12.5% for the past several years. The assessment rate has changed for various reasons. Sometimes it's due to changes in KUSF funding obligations, which audits may have resulted in less or more high-cost support for carriers, changes in support the legislature delegated for CANED, and sometimes it's due to changes in interstate revenues. One of the main drivers for the recent increases has been less interstate revenue to assess. This is particularly due to changes in consumer habits, whereas one might have used their phone in the past to make a call to communicate with someone, now they may send an email or text instead, or even communicate over apps. This results in less telecom revenues. As you'll see on the next slide, the fund size has decreased the past few years, but the assessment rate has grown, which again has primarily been due to the reduced revenues that can be assessed. This slide shows the size of the fund over 10 years. Again, the entire history would be difficult to show in one slide. Throughout the history of the KUSF, the phasing in of access reductions, and during the first 17 years, it stayed between 60 and 74 million. And in April 2013, House Bill 2201 amended KSA 66-2008 E3 to create a $30 million cap on the amount of annual KUSF distributed to all local exchange carriers operating under rate of return regulation. In April 2016, the legislature passed House Bill 2131, which added language to KSA 66-2008 E1 and E3 to clarify that once the cap is met, any reduction to KUSF support should be on a pro rata basis. As you can see, it has decreased steadily over the past few years, and this is largely due to the phasing out of support to the competitive carriers, which I'll explain further later in this presentation, and the explanation in slide 4 surrounding the reduction of assessed revenues. The KUSF supports 4 different programs. The largest program is the high cost program, and it is the program that most people are referring to when they talk about the KUSF. It is going to be less expensive to provide service to, let's say, the 3 or so million living in Chicago than it would be to provide the same number of people living in Kansas. Due to the higher population density in Chicago, this program helps fund those rural areas where it is more costly to serve. The Lifeline program is to help make telephone service more affordable to low-income individuals. 135% of the federal poverty level to participate in the eligible programs. The state Lifeline discount is $7.77 per month per household, and is to be applied as a reduction to the consumer's local phone bill. The TRS program, which is the Telecommunications Relay Service, provides telephone relay service for the hearing impaired. Users may dial 711 or the appropriate toll-free number to connect with the Kansas Relay Center to aid with these conversations. The next program, which is a related program to the TRS, is the Telecommunications Access Program, also known as TAP. This provides specialized equipment to Kansans with disabilities or impairments in order to access basic home telecom services. Kansas residents can qualify if they also have trouble hearing, seeing, speaking, remembering, walking, or holding a phone. Equipment includes like an amplified cordless phone, a large number amplified phone, cell phones, or tablets. As of July 1, 2012, the legislature stopped providing funding for CanEd through the KUSF, so I have removed it from the list of funded programs. The next slide, however, will show the total CanEd funds during the program's history. On slide 7. This shows the 5 different programs supported by the KUSF and the total funding provided to each. As you can see, approximately $1.4 billion has been provided in high-cost support, which is 89% of the total funding, over $94 million in support for CanEd, and approximately $35.1 million for relay service, and approximately $38.8 million for the Lifeline program, and approximately $13.3 million for TAP. The next slide, slide 8. Each year I calculate the amount of funding needed for the various programs and the projected revenues we expect to receive. This is just a forecast or budget of what will be paid out in the KUSF for planning purposes. The gross fund size for the new KUSF fiscal year, which is year 30, as of March 1st, 2026, is $34.1 million. You can see the amounts budgeted for each programs we just discussed on the pie chart. You'll also see that approximate $588,000 is budgeted for the administrator of the KUSF. Kansas statute requires the KCC to hire an administrator of the fund. Vantage Point Solutions is the current KUSF administrator, also known as VPS. VPS collects the KUSF assessments from all KUSF contributors and issues the KUSF disbursements based on information provided by the KCC. VPS does not determine how much KUSF support an entity is eligible for. Only the KCC does this. They also conduct 16 carrier audits per year, which is different than the financial audits we conduct. VPS's audits look to ensure the assessments are collected and remitted properly, and they also review to ensure the carrier is in compliance with KCC orders and statutes. Now let's get into the high cost component of the fund. The initial KUSF high cost support amount available for incumbent local exchange carriers was equal to the revenue lost when access charge reductions were implemented pursuant to state statute. Access charges are the prices long distance carriers pay local carriers for the originating and termination of long distance calls. These charges were historically higher than the actual cost of providing the service, and the revenue from these charges contributed to keeping rates for local service lower than they otherwise would have been. While the initial amount of the KUSF support was set to replace lost access revenues, which was revenue neutral and not necessarily cost-based, KSA 66-2008C requires that the Commission periodically review the KUSF to determine if the cost to provide service justifies modification of support. Because access rates were so high, they subsidized local telephone service. The statute provided for the transition to parity to occur over 3 years. Some of the access revenue was shifted to local rates and some to the KUSF. Beginning January 1st, 2014, pursuant to KSA 66-2008C, the reduction of support for competitive eligible communication carriers beginning March 1st of 2014 and over a period of 4 years in annual equal increments would reduce to 0. Additionally, a cap for Brightspeed was set at $11.4 million or the lesser of. As just stated, 66-2008C requires that the high-cost KUSF fund be cost-based, and initially it was not. So we had to move toward a cost-based KUSF. The FCC determined that support for price cap carriers such as AT&T and Brightspeed should be based on the cost to provide service if the network were being built given current technology rather than based on historical cost. The FCC developed a model to determine the forward-looking cost of providing service and support. The KCC followed suit with the KUSF high-cost model for AT&T and Brightspeed. Pursuant to KSA 66-2008 C5, AT&T ceased receiving KUSF support January 1st, 2014. AT&T is listed on here even though they are now an electing carrier. This is how they received their KUSF support when they were receiving support. Now, to attain cost-based KUSF for rate of return carriers, the Commission had to audit each of these rate of return carriers. The rate of return carriers are the rural local exchange carriers, often referred to as RLECs. Rate of return carrier support is based on embedded or historical costs. Each year, the Commission opens an annual eligible telecommunications carrier certification docket to certify appropriate use of Kansas Universal Service Fund support. In this docket, staff request receive support data, which is used to conduct a 5-year analysis to determine if an audit is necessary. Typically, the company will initiate the audit seeking additional KUSF support after completing a large investment as a way to seek recovery for the investment. As mentioned earlier, in April 2013, House Bill 2201 amended KSA 66-2008E3 to create a $30 million cap on the amount of annual KUSF distributed to all local exchange carriers operating under rate of return regulation. On slide 12 is a discussion of overview of the KUSF audit process. Pursuant to statute, there is a 240-day time frame under which commissioners must make its determination for audits. Usually, once a filing has been made, the parties develop a procedural schedule for the filing of testimony, an evidentiary hearing date. KCC technical staff conducts an on-site visit to review documents at the carrier's headquarters, send data requests to attain information. KCC staff and KCC consultants sponsor testimony over various topics, including separations, which is your interstate versus intrastate, regulated and non-regulated allocations, affiliate transactions, rate base and income statement adjustments, and finally, capital structure, cost of long-term debt, and rate on equity. If you have any specific questions on audits and we cannot answer, we can take those back to the folks at the KCC. Slide 13. This slide depicts the amount of high-cost KUSF support each rate of return carrier is expected to receive during the current KUSF fiscal year, March 2026 to February 2027. These are the RLECs, or the rural local exchange carriers. The amounts may vary based on the size of the company and other factors such as population density, infrastructure, investment differences. Thank you for inviting me here to speak today. I can answer any questions you may have at the appropriate time.
Thank you for being here and for the information. What questions do we have, committee? Senator Thompson.
Thank you. Thanks, Steve. I sit on utilities, but this is still a word salad of technical terms. They're trying to sort out that the bottom line is the USF for mitigating the cost of the last mile delivery out into the rural areas for those sparse areas where they need service?
That is a part of what the KOSF is for.
Could you expound on what the rest of it, just, again, you listen to all this, and there's all these rate caps, there's
Sure.
rate of return, there's cost. I just want a bottom line distilled, why are we doing this? Because it seems like what we're doing is we're suppressing the cost to one thing and just passing it, spreading it around. We're socializing the cost of providing service, and whereas free market could probably sort it out.
Probably the easiest way is just getting a conversation about universal service. And that is the principle that Kansans should have access to communication services. And in these rural areas is incredibly costly to serve such less population density. So you know, when we look at a metro area versus, you know, there may be 5 houses in a 20 square mile. It's from central office, routing of connection between the central office to those houses, and including equipment that's inside those central offices. So it would be the entire infrastructure to serve, you know, a low number of Kansans in a rural area.
And that part makes sense. With the changing technology, though, is the cost going to come down? I mean, is it possible to use C-band, satellite, or some other delivery method that might mitigate some of this cost for us long term?
Sure. There are some other service options available, like VoIP or wireless. Some of that infrastructure is very costly to get out into the rural areas. Just as I talked about with serving a metro area versus a rural area, you know, there could be large amounts of rock in the ground that requires blasting just to get, you know, your typical boring machine won't bore through that area. It's just the cost is so much higher, so rate of return on investment to get the service to those Kansans.
Bottom line, without this subsidy, you're saying that those customers would not be served?
They could not be, well, I suppose there's a potential where there could be a situation where they could not be served, where they, you know, would have access to emergency services like 911, or to call their son or daughter, grandpa, grandma, mother, father.
All righty, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Murphy.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, thanks for your presentation. I've actually got a constituent that's involved in serving a lot of this area. And I live in this area, you know, where my nearest neighbor is like 2.5 miles away. And I get the way all this works. He actually services a lot of these people. I mean, like in Barber County, and out, where it's several miles between houses and stuff. He tells me there's actually, and I wonder if we're not. You sort of alluded, Senator Thompson, about maybe the technology. It seems like maybe we're making sure that they have a horse and a buggy, when actually there's maybe a Volkswagen available that would better serve them. And he says there are technologies that would easily be put in where you don't have to put wires and stuff in, or fiber or anything like that. So I think it bears looking into those sorts of things, and because it is important everybody's served, but I think they could maybe be better served and the money better spent.
Any other questions? I do have a couple. So
Okay.
the purpose of this was to basically get the infrastructure and service out to folks who need it, correct?
It's not only that, but it's also maintenance of that infrastructure.
Okay, so where are we at on the infrastructure? This has been in place since 1990, 30 years. 30 years we've been funding the infrastructure part. So, and it looks like there's been a total, if I'm reading your chart right, on page 7, it looks like $1.6 billion has gone into these various programs. So did you look and say, okay, here's what it's going to take to build out the infrastructure to reach every Kansan in every corner. Here's how long it's going to take. That's this much. We can put on this fee, figure that out, and then figure out how much it is to maintain it. Was that the thought process that went into this? And if so, where are we in that process after 30 years?
So when the KUSF was created through the 96 Telecom Act, the legislature at that time modeled off the FUSF, so the Federal Universal Service Fund. And when this was created, the idea surrounding it was, again, to make sure that every Kansans were served in the rural areas. It's really easy. Everybody wants to serve in a metro area because the customers are plentiful. But in the rural areas, the RLECs are bound to provide service to anybody that were to ask for service. So this money that is provided to them every year that we all pay on our cell phone bill or VoIP bill, there's a line item on everybody's bill, including the federal line item. That money is to help maintain that particular service and quality of service to Kansans who don't have any other options to get service. Copper is all they have.
Yes, I understand that.
Okay.
But I'm trying to delineate between, because you say there's basically two parts to this. The build out, the infrastructure, and the maintenance. How is that broken down in here? Because to me, I get infrastructure, just like I'm assuming with any other infrastructure, you've got initial huge cost. To maintain it, we should see
Sure.
a decrease in that. So at what point is the infrastructure build out done and we move to maintenance, and that should be
So
less?
So there's a couple things in response to that. So as I've stated, providing the service, but the other component is when these audits are conducted, audit staff, they look at the investments that the RLECs are putting into the network or the telephone connectivity.
Okay,
Those are some things I'd probably have to defer to the RLECs.
Okay, if I could just for a moment, this is not my bailiwick, so RLECs, rural,
Local exchange carriers.
thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
This is Janet Buchanan. She can help out with that.
Okay, welcome. If you just introduce yourself and your title, please.
Janet Buchanan, Deputy Director of the Utilities Division for the Kansas Corporation Commission, and formerly worked in the telecommunications area. I think I just need to clear up one concept here. The infrastructure in 1996 was already in place. What the Universal Service Funds were established to do were to replace a system of subsidy that had been built into rates that existed at the time. There's a long-distance network and a local network, and long-distance rates subsidized the local rates. When we were starting to implement competition in the local markets, and the FCC determined that those access rates that for providing long-distance service should no longer hold the subsidy, and that it should be integrated into the local rates. And so the Universal Service Fund was developed as a replacement of that subsidy and would decline over time as competition took hold. But in these rural areas, there's less competition. And so there hasn't been the same amount of decline in support as you see like the areas that AT&T serves in Topeka, Kansas City, where they no longer receive support.
So if I may just ask a question. On slide 13, am I understanding all of these RLICs. These are all the RLICs that receive KUSF funds.
Correct.
Correct. That seems like an awful lot of competition for the rural area of
They
what
each
you're
serve
talking
an
about.
individual area. They don't overlap. They have a certified area that they serve, and so they aren't serving the same areas of Kansas.
Still seems like an awful lot for the size of our state, but maybe not, maybe. And how are
Well, that-
those, how is that determined? Who gets what area? How is that determined?
You know, I'd have to go back and look at the records, but the commission granted a certificate of service because they were initially regulated, well, they're still rate of return regulated. So they had a monopoly over that service area, just like an electric or gas utility would. So the certification process took place there. Initially, companies like AT&T or Southwestern Bell back in the day didn't want to serve in those areas because it was costly to serve. So some smaller companies were able to get access to lower cost loans through the RUS. And that enabled them to then take up service in these small areas, rural areas. And the commission granted them certificates then to serve the area where they thought they could handle and their loan would cover to build out infrastructure there. Oh, we can give you a map if you'd like to see what the certificated areas are.
Yeah, thank you. I have seen the map. If the rest of the committee would like to have the map, we can make that available to them as well. What other, Senator Alley?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So if I understand what you're saying is, in the beginning, they put together, they want to serve everybody they can in the whole state, and it's very expensive to do that. So the cost was put in, and then we are paying a fee, if you want to call it that, on our cell phone bill. What other things are we paying it on? I mean, do we pay it on our internet bill? We don't. So the only thing we pay it on would be our cell phone bill. Is that correct?
So there's a statute that covers the services that it would be on. It would be VoIP, and it would be wireless, and your wireline.
Your wired line, you say?
VoIP is voice internet over internet protocol. It's basically the newer technology of phone service. Sorry to interrupt you.
No problem. And I know for myself, I no longer have a landline. It's just not useful because I'm never there to answer it. But have we seen a drop-off of our landlines since everybody now carries a cell phone? And are we then subsidizing, it seems like we're subsidizing that landline that used to be necessary, when now everybody's a cell phone. So is this fee going to go down, or is it going to go up in the future? We're serving less people and more cost.
So to answer that, I kind of covered a little bit of that in slide 4, where I talk about there's less telecom revenues because people are shifting to other modes of communicating, text, using apps. The RLECs, they're required to provide that landline service. That's what their certificates were originally created to do. So this fund helps subsidize the cost that it would otherwise be much higher to provide those services. Each year of the odd year of the KUSF fiscal year, those access line rates are reviewed. So they were reviewed last year in fiscal year 29, and RLECs can increase those access line charges. But with that, any increase in the access line charges will have a reduction in their received KUSF support. So there's kind of a trade-off between the cost of providing service and the amount of KOSF support that they get.
So if I were to roll forward 20 years, what's this going to look like?
That would be hard for me to forecast out that far.
Seems like to me, in the last 20 years, we've got this in our pocket.
Yeah.
What's it going to be in the next 20 years? What are we going to have? I would almost predict we won't have a landline.
That would be very accurate, but it would be hard for me to commit to say that there would be no more landline. You know, I don't know what change will happen at the federal level that would require the Kansas legislature to make some changes. You know, if we have another 96 Telecom Act where they revamp the entire structure that Janet kind of highlighted in short, I don't know really what that looks like. I can't tell you access lines are reducing every odd year that we look at. There is a shift to newer technologies like voice internet over protocol. A lot of consumers are texting more than they're talking on their phone or using communication apps. That's just a trend that I think everybody is seeing nowadays.
I guess that when you come down to the bottom line, we're subsidizing on our cell phone for a landline that is getting less and less. But to maintain those landlines, it's going to cost more and more. So we're not using the landline as much, and this is just a personal opinion, we're not using the landline as much. Are we going to increase these taxes, or if you want to call it a tax, on our cell phone or on that line to subsidize something we're using less?
As I had stated, the assessment rate keeps rising. That was portrayed in slide 4. But I also want to remind that the RLECs are required to provide these landlines. So the cost of providing landline could potentially go up because we can't get the same equipment that they could get, 10 years ago. It may be more costly to maintain. And that's what this fund helps defer, so that investment in keeping the network going doesn't get passed on to ratepayers. But they're required to provide the POTS, or the plain old telephone service, which we also call as landline, until there's a change that happens, right?
I think that's my concern. Do we have a plan to look at that in the next 10 years, to look at really what's going on and to correct the subsidies versus what goes out to maintain the landline?
And I also want to note there's 3 other programs that this fund helps. Lifeline, which provides discounted service to Kansans that are at a certain poverty level. The TAP and the Relay, which they really work hand in hand, and those are for Kansans that they're either blind or they're deaf or hard of hearing. It provides adaptive devices that they couldn't otherwise afford. So it's not just solely the RLECs, here. And it also pays for the KOSF administrator, which by Kansas statute, the KCC has to go out to, an RFP process, request for proposal, to have a third party administer manage the fund. And additionally to that, it also covers the 16 carrier audits for compliance of carriers. So each year there's 16 carrier audits that get audited. It also funds an independent auditor to ensure that the third party administrator, which the current one is Vantage Point Solutions, that we have the fund is audited to make sure that commission orders, Kansas statutes are all being followed.
So just a couple things come to mind. I know that RLECs basically, for lack of a better term, have a monopoly within their area, correct?
Yes, that
And they build outside of their territory.
they cannot.
They cannot build outside of their assigned territory into any other areas.
No, they are obligated to serve the area that they were certificated to serve and no more.
Okay. So
So to expand on that, they can have a CLEC, which is a competitive local exchange carrier. They can serve outside their service territory, but for the purposes of the fund, it's for serving that particular area.
yes, yeah, I'm talking outside the fund. The RLECs who
yeah.
receive the fund, they've got a monopoly on a certain territory, but they're able to serve in areas that are outside of their designated area, correct?
Most of them have a CLEC and IXC, which a CLEC is competitive local exchange carrier, and an IXC is an inter-exchange carrier, which is basically long distance. So your long distance phone calls that would leave the state of Kansas.
So,
And it's around traffic, like telephone traffic.
could this potentially result in overbuild in any areas? Where you've got RLECs competing in, they've got a monopoly here, but they're competing in other areas with companies that aren't part of the KUSF. Could that result in overbuild? Too many providers in too many areas competing in the same
Competition,
market.
I'm trying to understand the overbill component. Are you referencing multiple carriers in one area and consumer selection?
Oh, I think competition's great,
Yes.
but not if it's, perhaps what I'm trying to understand is the dynamic here between RLECs who are getting part of this fund to be in certain areas, but then they can also compete, which is great. I love competition, but are we subsidizing one group over the free market folks who don't get that? Is there crossover?
So so a certificated CLEC or competitive local exchange carrier cannot serve in an RLEC territory due to rural entry
Right.
guidelines.
But that isn't true on the flip side.
Right. The CLECs can operate in AT&T and Brightspeed service areas,
Okay,
which is the higher competition, which would be likely more metro areas, where the cost of investment to provide service is quite low, versus in the rural areas where it's quite high.
so could possibly companies that complain both feel, if I'm a company, I'm going to maximize my profit. I'm going to go to where it's the lower cost. I'm going to build in the lower cost competitive areas rather than, are there any stipulations that the money for this has to go to build out those rural areas? Are we subsidizing build out in competitive areas? That's what I want to know.
No.
And how do we know that?
That's how the RLECs were structured in their certificate.
Okay. There was, sorry, do you have additional information for us on that?
So the audits of the RLECs, those are specific to the service areas that they serve. That's how it's determined on the KUSF support. And those, let me see which slide it was. Slide 11. So there's two components that happens here. Annually, there's a docket open each year to review the data of how the money is spent And that's the annual eligible telecommunications carrier certification docket. That's what certifies the appropriate use of the KUSF funds. And then the secondary piece is if an RLEC were to come in and ask for additional KUSF support, an audit is conducted to review their entire financials, basically, to determine the appropriate use of spent dollars on investment, infrastructure. That's what makes the determination on how much KUSF support they get. At the very beginning of this, every single RLEC was audited, and then now we've shifted to a company-based request. So they would file a docket requesting KUSF support or additional KUSF support based upon their investments.
Okay, thank you. One last question from me, and then Senator Murphy.
Okay.
There was a lot of COVID money that was given to the state. I believe it was, what, 178 million? This may be outside, you may not know this, but where did that money go? Because I would think, did it go to the RLECs? Did it go to across the state? Do you know how that was determined, where the COVID money was distributed for telecommunications in the state?
I do not know that.
Okay.
I'm not sure we would have access to that information. I just don't know.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry.
We'll try to find that out. Thank you.
Okay.
Senator Murphy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So in listening to this, is the key word here landline?
Yes.
So if we were wanting to improve and modernize, we could maybe just remove that word. And that way, everybody's guaranteed service. It just doesn't have to be a landline.
There would have to be major changes, likely at the federal level, for us to make changes like that. Because, I mean, right now, they're required to provide those landline services, and that's currently still the requirement.
So we're still making people have horse and buggies. Okay.
It's
That's not your fault. I'm sorry.
it's mainly up to the cost that it takes or the investment to serve those rural areas.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, committee, any last questions? Seeing none, thank you so much for being here and helping us try to understand this very complicated issue. Appreciate your time.
You're welcome.
Committee, seeing no other business before us, we are adjourned.